The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. There's a lot going on in Nebraska in terms of the unicameral. We are coming up to a short session that is going to be unlike no other because of state senators, so many of them that are term limited, and this is their last blast, so to speak. It is a short session, as I said, and there's so much on the table. One of the things on the table is kind of fooling around with Nebraska's Campaign Finance Limitation Act. My guest today is Jack Gould. He's with Common Cause Nebraska, and this is a major concern for your organization, as are other things, but this is at the top of your list here in Nebraska.
It is. It's the Campaign Finance Act was passed in 1991 and went into effect fully funded in 1996. And there hasn't been a session where there hasn't been someone trying to get rid of it. And at the same time, we haven't had a single legislative race that's exceeded the voluntary spending limit. So we feel the Campaign Finance Act has done a great job of keeping spending down in the state.
Well, let's just briefly, what does it do so people know? I mean, I think they have a sense of it because it's been around for a while, but...
Well, when individuals decide to run for state office, they are given an opportunity to comply with the spending limit, and every office has a spending limit. In the case of the legislature, it's $73,000. Or they can say that they are not going to comply. It's a voluntary issue, and at that point they have to file an estimate as to how much they will spend beyond that limit. And at that point, that becomes a triggering mechanism for public funds. And the public funds come from fine money, particularly fines placed on lobbying interests or other campaigns. And that money has built up to over $500,000, which sits in a fund. And when a candidate runs and his opponent chooses not to sign the agreement on the limit, then there's money there. And at the point at which the non-complying candidate reaches 40% of their estimate, it triggers money to the other candidate.
Trying to even the playing field a little bit.
Exactly.
Well,
we don't want to see offices bought and sold in the state. That's the main thing. We don't want it to be a rich man's game or a case of who can raise the money. There has to be a way in which candidates are really working on the issues.
Now, also, candidates, donors, if they comply with this, they file. And isn't that true? Because I have gone online and checked as a reporter to see who's paying for campaigns.
All contributions are public and listed. And we don't have limits on individual contributions. Some people have given as much as $90,000 to a candidate, so we're not limited in that area.
As the federal races generally have
the federal
individual
yes,
limitations.
But not within the state. We looked at doing that, at having limits on contributions, but we found that in other states, corporations can have their executives making donations, individuals can have their families making contributions, so we felt that in this state we would be maybe wiser to try to limit the spending. And it's also much easier to monitor the spending.
Okay, your organization isn't the only one concerned about this. There are people concerned with the free press that are interested because it allows them to report to the constituency, who's, paying for these campaigns.
It is a freedom of information issue too. I mean, the public has a right to know how money's being spent, where it's coming from. There's also well, the League of Women Voters is concerned about this issue. The Appleseed Center, many citizens groups are all
not
concerned.
just you liberal types necessarily in Common
No.
Cause. No, specifically, what is happening? There's quite a bit of jockeying going on last session regarding this act.
Well, there's been an ongoing struggle. Senator Beitler is the senator that brought the legislation back in the early 90s.
Chris Beitler
And
from
he has
Lincoln.
been the advocate for campaign finance and trying to update the system. It really grew out of a citizens organization, a task force of CEOs, lobbyists, senators, Common Cause people, League of Women Voters, a lot of citizens groups. Back in the late 89 is when it started. And they came up with this bill, and it was Beitler that took the bill and got it passed. And since that time, we've found loopholes in it and problems with it that we've tried to repair and improve on, but many times they've been blocked on the floor. And in every legislative session, there have been those senators that have tried to get rid of it altogether. And so we've had an ongoing battle.
Well, more recently, the Speaker of the Legislature that's been high on his agenda.
Speaker Beshear has a number of times tried to get rid of the Campaign Finance Act. In this case, he has a signed agreement that he is term limited, Senator Beitler's term limited. It's kind of a shootout at the OK Corral. They are going to face each other, and there's going to be an up or down vote on the Campaign Finance Act.
And this is an agreement they signed.
They
This
signed
is
the
an
agreement.
unusual kind of situation, is it not?
I've never seen it done before.
Explain this agreement, how it came about.
Well, the agreement, we had a bill, LB 188, which was in the legislature in the last session, but we couldn't get it out of committee.
And the idea of this bill was to tighten things up a little or
Right.
fix those loopholes
It
or
would
whatever?
improve the triggering mechanism. It readjusted the limits so that right now the spending limits were fixed back in the early 90s, and they need to be updated because the cost of campaign.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have nothing in the bill that allows the limits to be adjusted to the cost of living. So this bill would do that. Plus it would establish a little bit better triggering mechanism for funding. And it's been blocked several times. Senator Beshear's been probably the most largest opponent to this thing. But at the same time, we keep trying to improve it. And in the last session, the bill did not get out until the last day that a bill could get out of committee. And it got out because Senator Beshear and Senator Beitler signed this agreement. So the bill will be up for an up or down vote. Senator Beshear will, it's written that he will have an amendment, and he will put it up, and the amendment would abolish the entire thing. Senator Beitler is allowed to make an amendment that would adjust to the Hergert situation at the University of Nebraska.
And we'll talk about that. But I guess, what are the arguments against it? Maybe it's just,
Yeah.
we've sort of grown up with campaign finance. A lot of people that watch who are younger than we are, Jack,
Yeah.
they haven't really known any difference, that there was some sort of reporting mechanism and help if huge amounts are spent by one candidate, both on the local levels and national levels. So what's the argument against this?
Well, the largest, most common argument against it is this First Amendment right, freedom of speech, that a man should be allowed to spend his money any way he wants to, and therefore you shouldn't be able to limit a man's ability to spend as much as he wants to.
There's nothing in there that really limits it, is there?
It's a voluntary spending limit
Right.
just on spending, not on contributions. But our feeling is that our founding fathers didn't intend our Constitution to limit to limit the poor man's ability to speak, because in reality what you're doing, if you say a rich man can spend as much as he wants, or a corporation can spend as much as they want, and a candidate can spend as much as they want, then the people with the money get to speak louder than the people who don't have the money. And so this bill is to give the other side, the average man, the opportunity to run for office without having to raise huge amounts of money.
And if the other candidate, say we're down to two candidates, chooses to spend
Right.
more, then there's help for the other guy. Is
Exactly.
that some?
It doesn't really, that's why we say there's no problem with it. It doesn't really limit the other candidate. If he says, I don't want to go along, then the only thing he has to do is we say to him, well, how much are you going to spend? And there are at least 4 opportunities during the campaign where he can increase or decrease his estimate. So
Yeah,
it isn't a
different
fixed
reporting
thing. Yeah.
periods.
He doesn't know how much he's going to raise over that amount. And so there's opportunities. It doesn't really discriminate against the candidate who decides not to go along with a voluntary limit.
You mentioned Regent Hergert, whom we'll talk about that, but the regents campaigns have been interesting over the last few years. There are huge sums of money for a non-paid position that, I guess, theoretically, although the university system is an important part of the state. I mean, it's a higher education, the lowest cost higher education for people in this state. So it has that stature. Certainly, Big Red has a certain stature
It does.
too. But it's amazing how much money is spent in those races,
Well, it's only happened in the last few years.
and mostly in the Omaha area. Or am I?
It has, well, Hergert, of course, is rural.
Right.
But the other two candidates that have really broken the bank have been Omaha people.
And what kinds of, just so people get an idea, how much are people spending? Give me some examples of how much they've spent.
We have established a $50,000 limit for the Regents race, and no one had ever exceeded $50,000 until Regent Fairlick came along. And Regent Fairlick estimated at $350,000. So that was the first shocker. I saw
They
that.
don't even spend that much sometimes to run for mayor of the largest city in the state.
That's right. It was a shocker to us. I even called him at home and asked him exactly why was he doing this, because we couldn't understand what was going on. And he felt that he needed to spend $1 per constituent. That was his argument. And that these are large areas, and there's some truth to that.
And at the time, he was running against a long-term incumbent.
Yeah, that's correct. And so he spent this huge amount of money to get elected, and the problem was that most of the money is spent in the last 2 weeks of the race, and it's spent on TV and radio, and sometimes they become attack ads, and so it's
no one can answer, the other
they
person
can't
can't answer it.
That's exactly right.
Again, part of that ability, I guess it's access to free speech, sort of.
Right, and that was the
Easy.
first time we really experienced all the late advertising, and we realized that we needed to trigger money earlier to the other candidates. So since the Fairlick campaign, we've been trying to improve the triggering mechanism, because Scroop only had 2 weeks to catch up, and she hadn't lined up all of the ads, so she couldn't really run against.
Yeah,
Fairlick.
sometimes during an election where there are a lot of races going on, it's impossible at the last minute, unless you've been able to plan,
That's right.
to get airtime.
Correct.
You can generally get newspaper space because they can add to it, but
Right.
airtime is finite.
Right.
And when it's booked, it's booked. When it's sold, it's sold. So that
The troubling thing about this is that then Mr. Hawks came along and spent $450,000, and then Hergert came along, and I don't know how much he would have spent, but he was up around in the neighborhood of $150,000. And we're concerned for a number of reasons. You mentioned conflict of interest as being a problem to us, and here we know that the Speaker, who is an opponent of campaign finance, has been a contributor, and he has been the lawyer for both Fairlick and for Hergert. So when we talk about conflicts of interest, I think as a lawyer accepting funds from candidates, accepting funds from a client, and then being on the floor trying to get rid of something that's a problem to them is not good. And so we've raised that question, and we'll continue to raise it.
talking about Regent Hergert, he's under a lot of pressure. Have you been involved at all in opining on this situation?
Well, we were the first organization to file a complaint against Hergert, and it was based on the fact that his late filings came so late that didn't trigger the money to Don Blank. And so ours was the fact that he had not filed his report on time. That's what we complained about. But it soon became evident that there were also some loan problems, and Senator Beitler filed a complaint on that issue. And then Accountability and Disclosure itself found 2 reporting violations, which they filed complaints on. So in all, there were 4 complaints filed, and they were all upheld and resulted in a $33,000 fine.
Yes. So are you still feeling that he should resign?
Definitely, no question about it. I mean, this was, we feel that it was intentional, the fact that he filed the late report.
He sandbagged.
He did. He did.
That's what you're saying.
Don Blank had, in the primary, had a similar problem, and there was some public money triggered in the primary, and the late report was not filed, but a second report showed spending, and either one of the reports would have triggered money. So the fact that they filed the report that showed the spending triggered the money to Blank, and he was able to compete. But in the second race, neither the funding report was filed nor the report of 40% spending showed up. So in that case, it would appear that, you know, the purpose was we're not going to report anything until it's too late, and that's what happened.
Now, are all state offices covered by the Nebraska Campaign Finance Limitation Act?
They are. There's a voluntary spending limit, and it's amazing because in most cases, since '96, everyone has either complied. There have been only a few exceptions. The treasurer's race and the regent's race are the most public.
Not you'd think the governor's race, if you were, you know, if you were going to pick one, just because of the breadth of that. Now, treasurer is statewide too, but
the governor's race, though, every time we have the governor's campaign, the legislature waives the governor's race. It's the only race that we don't have the funding really to cover. So it's until we have $1 million in the fund, we aren't going to feel comfortable covering the governor's race. But every other race is covered.
And generally, and you correct me if I'm wrong, there's enough money on both sides if it was a real horse race. We've had some less than what I would call horse races in the governor's race, and I don't think it was just because of money.
I think so. I
to
think
be fair,
the governor's race is sort of a whole different program compared to the other legislative races and other executive offices.
Plus, a lot of people would want to contribute it. I mean, when
It's
you're
high profile.
It's not just high profile, but it affects all of us. A regent's race, people don't look on that
That's
as affecting them. That there's so much high stakes involved. And generally, to be honest, the regents don't have the kind of power that a governor does. So there's not as many people kind of tuned into it.
But the regent has tremendous power over what goes on at the university.
That's
in
true.
Determining curriculum, in determining funding, determining programs. And this makes it a desirable thing if you have an agenda. And so this is a concern.
And there is a concern that there's a more, and I don't want to get into the politics of it all, but that it's generally more conservative agenda that is moving into the regents arena, and it seems to be the conservatives that are either have and or are willing to dish out a lot of money to gain, to get that clout back, leaning their way.
It would appear that way.
I mean, that's how it looks.
That seems to be, I mean, when you look at the contributors to the Fair Lake campaign, the Hawks campaign, and not so much the Herger campaign. He spent mostly his own money. But the other two campaigns, it's repetitive. Many of the same people.
They're very predictable in their political leanings.
Yeah, and the contributors are similar, and so you begin to feel that there is an agenda.
And there is certainly a right.
That's right.
To get anybody to lean.
That's right.
That's not the issue per se. It's the dollars is what you're talking about.
From a common cause perspective, we're concerned about the violations of the Campaign Finance Act and making sure that the Campaign Finance Act stays intact, that it's not destroyed.
What should people do if they feel strongly about this? And I'm guessing that a lot of regular folk,
right,
one way or the other politically, like to know where the bread's buttered.
You bet, and I think on any issue, the public doesn't realize their power. I mean, a simple phone call to a senator, even if he's not there, if you're talking with his legislative aide, makes an impression. And they do keep track. And I've seen cases where 6 phone calls from constituents has made the difference in a vote.
Sometimes because there's so few people that
call. Right.
That's
exactly right. Few people do. And so on this question, a phone call to a senator is crucial. There's also, we have a website. You go to commoncause.org.
Mm-hmm. Then you can find a little map of the United States in the lower right-hand side, and you can click on that, and you can get to the Nebraska.
And we have a petition, an electronic petition. Over on the right-hand column, it says "Sign our petition" in red. If you tap on that, our petition comes up, and we can add your name to those who support the Campaign Finance Act. There's also an organizational letter that Senator Beitler is going to circulate, in which groups of citizens, whatever your organization, can sign on by contacting his office and letting them know that your organization would like to be included in the letter to defend the Campaign Finance Act, and it can be added.
How does this sort of legislation fit into the whole scheme of Common Cause nationally? They've been very concerned about voter access, voter rights,
Exactly.
making sure that the voter has the highest ability to affect an election, I guess, based on the publicity, the access to a polling place. I mean, this is huge.
It's the most basic function of democracy is voting, and it's so important that we keep it clean and open, and that we get citizens involved in issues. So many times when talking with people, they say they feel like they're helpless or they can't get involved, and that's why I say a simple phone call to a senator has a tremendous impact. And by getting involved and going to hearings and speaking out if you're concerned about a specific issue, it's vital. Letters to the editor, op-ed pieces, all of these things have a tremendous impact.
There are some other things that have been going on that you're concerned about, the revolving door from unicameral to lobbyist. I'm guessing that you're more concerned with all these term limits that the court may uphold the term limits rule, and 20 plus state senators could be
Gone.
and could be lobbyists the day after they leave.
Well, that's been a concern. I mean, at given times over the last few years, we've had as many as 22 former senators back lobbying.
No, I'd say, hey, more power to them. I mean, they got to make a living, and they sure weren't paid all that well
They were
while
not
they were
paid
in
well.
office.
We would support better pay for the senators, but the problem is that when you're in the office and you are in a specific committee, you know all of the ins and outs of the committee. You know how your colleagues feel. You know the issues. You know the arguments. And if you leave office and within a month are back lobbying the same committee that you served on, you have privileged information, and I mean privilege to the public. You are entrusted by the public to do your duty, not to sell.
With
what you
all
know.
that information that you got was meant to help the process
public.
along and serve the public.
Often when you're hired by a lobbying firm, you may well be working not in the interest of the public. You're working in the interest of a company or somebody
Whoever's
that's hired
paying you.
Exactly. You're a hired gun. And so our feeling is that there needs to be a cooling off period. If a senator leaves office, he should be out for at least a year,
Or she.
or she, before they become paid lobbyists. Now, that would mean they could still come back on their own and there as a citizen and say whatever they wanted, but they shouldn't accept money for lobbying until they're at least a year out of office. And many
Distance
states
from
have
that
two.
privy information, so to speak.
Right, and it gives time for the committees to change, for the issues to change, and it gives them, I guess, a cooling off period in which they can get a little bit back to the citizens' role.
Frankly,
again.
I don't see. Have you worked to get any legislation passed to that? Because I don't see it happening.
No, well, we have on 3 occasions had bills that either have been locked into committee. We've had some that have gotten to the floor, but we've never been able to get any passed. And I think a lot of cases it revolves around the salary. Senators feel they're underpaid, they're overworked. All these arguments are true. But in the public interest, we need to have safeguards. And so we will continue to work for that. In the last session, we had kind of the classic example when Senator Brahms stepped down as Speaker of the legislature. Within 2 weeks, he was hired by 2 telecommunications companies that...
And as it turned out, there was some telecommunications legislation.
Right.
There was a lot at stake.
Actually, one of the bills was a bill that he had brought as a senator and then came back and lobbied for the similar bill as a paid lobbyist in that very session. So it was within a 2-week period he went from a representative of the people to a paid representative of the telecommunication industry.
And whether he was on the right side of that issue is not important, but it was one of those kinds of things that he has expertise, and that was potentially an important bill, certainly to the cable television operators
Very
in the
important
state.
bill to them.
But it was important to the people in that it might have been good for them to pass or not, that would have allowed other companies to come in and do cable.
Well, from our perspective, we felt that the bill was prohibitive. It had a 2-year, or actually it had a 6-year prohibition on new technology coming into the state. And from our perspective, that was creating a monopoly in which the existing cable and phone companies were going to be able to expand their activities in the telecommunications and computer areas without the new competition. And that was not in the best interest of the public.
Well, some people thought it was because they do need that business in order to invest that huge. There's a huge investment.
And it produces tax dollars.
Right.
I mean, there's no question. The phone companies and the cable companies produce tax dollars. The new technology might not produce the same amount of tax dollars, but at the same time, it serves the public. That was our.
But it's interesting that someone who tried to shepherd it through the legislature turned around and then
was hired.
Access to all the information and all what was on the minds of the senators, as you pointed out,
That's right.
was able to get a bill that really got very little play until you even got involved with it.
Well, it didn't get a lot of play at first, and it looked like it was on the fast track. But then a lot of people started asking questions. The municipal power pool, there were, a lot of rural people started becoming aware that they were going to get shortchanged on access. And
because there's not a lot of money to be made sometimes by those
Exactly.
monopoly companies out in the hinterland.
The phone companies don't reach the rural areas. They service the towns, and they provide
Where the people are.
That's right. And same with high-speed service. You can't get it if you're on a farm somewhere from the phone company. And in a lot of cases, the cable companies just service the towns. So the rural people are the ones really that get hurt. But also cities now, with some of the new technology that's gone into Philadelphia and Seattle, they're coming up with a very low-cost, in some cases free, wireless computer access, which could be done in a lot of our towns and cities. And this prohibition blocks that. And it needs to be really looked at.
We have a minute left is all, and if you just want to rattle off a few of the kinds of things nationally that they're obviously involved with the ethics,
Right.
Given what's going on in Congress, and even public broadcasting's come into the fray because
That's
of
right.
their concerns about.
Well, it's the broadcasting area is really a new area for us, but it's one in which we're concerned about public broadcasting, that they continue to have access to the people, that we don't see that being threatened by private interests. We're also concerned about the consolidation of the news media, that there's becoming fewer independent papers. And
So
more and
you
more.
like those voices to be heard.
We hope that the voices of the people can be heard.
Well, this voice has to be stilled right now because
That's
we're out
fine.
of time. Jack Gould with Common Cause Nebraska, thank you for joining us. And go to commoncause.org if you'd like to know more about these issues. Thanks for joining us this week on Consider This. See you next week.
Thank
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.